Welcome back, everyone. Welcome to another Culture Northumberland research podcast with me, Claire Venus. I'm so delighted to have my colleague Leila with me today, and we have prepared a conversation for you in terms of we've had a pre-conversation, which we did a couple of weeks ago in Newcastle around these themes, and these felt really important themes to be talking about right here in 2024, right here in terms of where we are navigating our careers moving forward, how we are inviting other people to share in this career that we've chosen in the arts, culture and heritage sector. So we're going to see where we get to. We'd really like you to kind of comment and explore these topics with us. So if you're listening in the future and catching up, please use the comment section on the post and email us and tell us what you think. Join in with Leila's Facebook group as well. We're going to talk about leadership in the arts, we're going to talk about reciprocity in the arts, and we're going to talk about generosity. And these are going to be all from our felt experiences of having this space where we have given these themes some thought, and we've come to our work and our practice in this approach to these themes. And we found some common ground, and it might land for you, it might be new information, but like I said, we'd really love to hear from you. So hi Leila, it's so lovely to have you here.
Hello, it's so lovely to be here as well. And it feels really nice because it's like, yeah, sort of a really nice way to end the week, which is lovely.
Yeah, we're recording on a Friday morning. I was just saying we're on the cusp of Annex Story Festival, which is an event I've been heavily involved in. I'm not on the organising panel, but I feel like I am. But I'm really looking forward to being in the thick of events and seeing people and going out to dinner and having coffees with people. It just feels like such a treat because that sort of stuff I usually would have to travel for, and then I've got to get home or whatever to rural Northumberland. So it feels nice to be doing that. Nice to be doing this conversation as well, the power of Zoom. For the people that don't know who you are, Leila, just in case people are finding this through another source, we do have some international listeners, which is very exciting. Could you introduce yourself and what you do in the world, what you're doing with Northeast Cultural Freelancers and how it fits in your freelance portfolio?
Absolutely. So, my name's Leila Darrenville, and I've been working in the arts and cultural sector for over 20 years, which is quite a terrifying thing to say. But I've been involved in it since I was tiny. So, since I was really small, my mum's an actor in the region, and so I've been around like arts and culture and artists and practitioners and creatives since I was tiny. So I suppose when you said before about this career that we've chosen, sometimes I feel a little bit like it chose me, like I didn't really have a choice in a lovely positive way. But yeah, it sort of feels a little bit like I'm not sure there was anything else that I could have done other than go into this world, as much as my mum tried to sort of push me in the other direction. I've worked with one of the biggest national portfolio organisations in the Northeast for a lot of years. I was there for 12 years, which was a truly wonderful experience in loads of ways. You know, it was at a time where there was a lot of money in the region as well, which was really exciting. It felt like a real sort of sense of abundance during that time. And then I went freelance in 2015, so coming up for 9 years ago, and I have worked in lots of different spaces there, but majority of it's around like a creative producer role, so more on the organising side of things, and it sort of ended up channeling into artist development. So working with artists who just need a bit of support, maybe it might be a door opening for them, or it might be skills and development, it might be mentoring, all of those sorts of things. So working very much in that space, although sometimes like events and things as well. Although as I get older and older, they become much more exhausting. And around in 2019, so around 5 years ago, I started Northeast Cultural Freelancers because when I first went freelance, I really recognised that I had lots of freelance friends, built a network around myself, but I had gone from working in quite a structured organisation where there was lots of opportunity to have conversations with different people from different spaces, to go into this space where actually I really needed to seek out those things and seek out those people who'd be able to help me. So Northeast Cultural Freelancers started as a really simple prospect of a Facebook group. And that Facebook group still exists. We've got over, I think it's 4,300 members on there at the moment, and it's a really active group, which is amazing. Really generous and beautiful community. And I started that in, let's say, in 2019. The first year, it was great. It was this space where people could really share different questions, connect with each other. There was collaborations in there, but lots of it was around like questions and challenges, frustrations, that kind of thing. But then obviously when the pandemic hit in 2020, we've been going for almost exactly a year. It was literally like the birthday of Northeast Cultural Freelancers was sort of on the cusp of when everything closed down. It became a different space at that point, and I'd always set it up to be that kind of flexible, responsive space. So it became a space where people could really connect, could share, could be feel less alone, I suppose, because at that point where everything stopped, it became such a lonely space to be a freelancer because you were literally in your house, all your work had stopped, and it was really quite a scary and terrifying time. There was no support in place. There was quite conflicting information or confusing information that was coming out. So it became that space where people could kind of pick through that. And we became a much more strategic. I think that we sort of had much more of a strategic role where we'd always done a level of deep listening, and we'd already sort of begun to move into that more strategic role, connecting with Arts Council and other colleagues. But at that point, it felt like a real point where my role within it all changed quite dramatically, where I was listening to what was going on. I was lobbying, I was supporting, I was communicating to more of the organisational, institutional level. I was having regular meetings with Arts Council, all of those kinds of things. And it really sort of shifted my role, but also shifted the role of the group. And that's continued to happen. That's continued to grow and develop and change. So I'm connected into national conversations, connected really deeply with the Arts Council, with working with other funders as well, and most of the organisations, Northeast Culture Partnership, a lot of the place-based culture partnerships like the Culture Compact for Newcastle, North Tyneside, Culture Northumberland, all the other sort of spaces, Culture Durham, all of those sort of working to try and ensure that freelancers are part of the thinking, really. You know, it's not to say that that it was trying to take away that division that happens a lot within the sector through that organisational side of things and freelancers, trying to bring some of that thinking a little bit closer together and make sure that freelancers aren't kind of missed off, really. So it's been a wild journey. It's had some slightly bizarre moments in it, like speaking at the House of Lords back in 2020, standing in my kitchen on Zoom, with all of the lords in their little boxes on my screen, and sort of thinking, oh my God, this is where my life's got to. This is wild. Or homeschooling my children and having to do these like really quite high level meetings whilst I've got a toddler running around my feet and trying to sort of be like, I'm definitely a professional, honest.
The
And
thing
actually, do you know what? Rethinking what
is,
professional even means. Like, I think that's been such a big learning curve for me as well. Like, really understanding that, like, bringing the humanity back to what professional means, and bringing the humanity back to, and I think the use of Zoom and through the pandemic really did that for a lot of people. Like, this is reality for so many people. Like, you don't have to be in a suit in around a board table or in an office. You can be sat in your bed. On your bed, not in your bed, on your bed in Bentham, and like that's okay too.
yeah, absolutely. It's that lens of where we do the work from and being able to move the work along, even if we've got caring responsibilities or working on other projects, because you don't do this full time, right? You know, this is part of your week every single week and you're committed and dedicated to it, but you do other work and you're plugged into the sector. I feel like when you first started, did you have that geographical component where it was just Newcastle or just Newcastle Gateshead, and then you quickly shifted that out after a little while of kind of experimenting with what that means and in response to what people were asking you to do?
Yeah, absolutely. It was Tyne and Weir Cultural Freelancers to start with, and there was a couple of reasons for doing that. Partially because I'm based in Gateshead. I do a lot of work in Newcastle, and at that point was doing a lot of work in Sunderland as well. So it sort of made sense to have that Tyne and Weir focus. I've worked on region-wide projects before, and there's always a feeling, like there's always a frustration from the south of the region and from the north of the region that they don't get as much. And I completely understand that frustration. It is a deep frustration. A lot of the stuff focuses in Newcastle and Newcastle and Sunderland now more so, and Durham, I guess, a bit as well. I didn't want, this was me doing this. It wasn't, it's not funded. It is only part of my time. For a long period of time, it was completely voluntary. Like all of the work I was doing was completely voluntary. And so I didn't want to I wanted to get rid of those assumptions from people. I wanted it to have that kind of place-based feel to it, to stop some of those frustrations, to go, right, okay, this is where it's based and this is where it's anchored because of me. It doesn't mean that people outside of that space can't be connected to it. Of course, so many people join from elsewhere in the region. We've got people from Yorkshire. One of the things we say is you don't have to be based in, so this for Tyne and Wear, and I say this for the Northeast as well. You don't have to be based in the Northeast. You have to be connected to it, though. You have to have a connection to it, and you choose what that connection is. So it might be, for some people, it might be like slightly less solid than for others. Uh, but it's all about that kind of making sure that the people weren't necessarily expecting something different from it than I was actually capable of giving. I had the capacity to give. Obviously, during the pandemic, I mean, there was no such thing as boundaries, was there? Because, I delivered sessions to a Russian university. Like, it's not, you just didn't have the borders in the same way. And I kind of approached it with the group and said, I'm thinking about changing the name from Tyne and Wear to Northeast. How do people feel about that? And everyone was like, yeah, of course, go for it. Like, it doesn't make sense to have it just Tyne and Wear. You don't just work in Tyne and Wear. We're not all from Tyne and Wear. Like, it's totally fine to extend it out. So yeah, it changed at that point.
And seeing that in real time, what I felt, and we were having conversations behind the scenes as well, was that there was that spirit of generosity and trust that it would still be something that you could manage and that you had a really tight hold on what it was there to do. And that felt, yeah, that felt really aligned with your values and what you wanted it to be, and that generous listening and responding to what other people were saying to you as well. At the same time, so Culture Northumberland was formed in 2020 as a project, as you know, with Jason Thompson, because Jason Thompson and I had this idea of, well, how do we better connect the freelancers? This was before anybody was Zooming. I think I'd Zoomed once on my living room floor and I was like so freaked out by it. So 2020, obviously, there was that huge big shift and we didn't know that was coming when we were planning the Culture Northumberland project. And then very quickly, we were able to see that a lot of the challenges that Northumberland-based freelancers had, there was a synchronicity, and a lot of the frustrations that they had of feeling like they were outside of the cities, outside of things going on, outside of the conversations that happened in the pub after a show, outside because of other reasons as well, care and responsibilities or neurodivergence, all of this was bubbling up. And we were like, okay, like, let's just keep talking, let's keep sharing practice, let's keep sharing process. And you and I came together, I think about a year later, when we worked with Creative UK to create this challenge fund
Yeah.
opportunity. So I could see, I mean, it was really quite lucky that I'd had the capacity, because I was off with a newborn at the time, but I'd had the capacity to understand what Creative UK were about and what the challenge fund was about. I had a previous working relationship with Carol, and I said, look, this would be so brilliant to be able to offer to the freelancers who have been working tirelessly throughout the pandemic and actually have seen that we can be innovative and we can challenge ourselves and we can work in new ways. What can we do together? So we held an event at the Annick Playhouse together with shared values, shared aims, bringing people together, understanding people from across the region, because it wasn't just for Northumberland-based freelancers. And that felt like, for me, a real moment in time of going, it's you and I that have made that happen. Like, we were there, we had the conversations, we could see what was possible, we could see we could unlock this funding, and we just went for it, didn't we?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, I would say we did, but it was very much, a lot of that energy was you in that space. Um, but yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? That kind of shift and change and really understanding what is possible, the innovation, the ingenuity, the resilience of the freelance community. And I think that's what we sort of brought together of, like, actually, if we do this with Creative UK, then we can create something really, really positive and really beneficial, because we know our community, we know what the challenges are for people. Not all of them, of course, there's still a lot of more listening to do, but we have a much, much better idea than quite often a lot of the institutions and organisations. And so, if anything, support-wise needs to be put in place, I think it is really important for people to reach out to, and I'm not saying necessarily just me and you, of course, there's lots of other people out there, but sort of being able to have some of those conversations and have some of that knowledge about what's going on for people, and understanding what is, what's possible, what's relevant, because for lots of people there might be things that are put in place that are completely irrelevant to a lot of the community. um, what's useful, because that's the other thing. I mean, we're all so capacity laden, we've got like not a single moment to even breathe. So capacity is so important. So if something is felt to be useful, then of course people will invest their time into that. But if something isn't felt to be useful for whatever reason, then people won't invest their time into that. And I think that's really, really important, for lots of organisations to remember at the moment, that freelancers are pulled in about 70 million directions through work, through personal circumstance, and then also through opportunities that are kind of quite often opportunities that are offered to them. So like, what is really, really useful, the freelance community is also an audience, and like, how are you going to be really going for what that audience want at that moment? We're not a monolith, so as much as saying that, we can still sort of segment ourselves as an audience, but equally there's certain things that just aren't useful for us, and it can really drain our time, which then drains our capacity, which then puts pressure on whether it's work or home life or other circumstances.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that space of being discerning about opportunities, we're doing the quotation marks here, has been one of the most big breakthroughs for me in the last little while, because I definitely did take all the opportunities that were offered to me through the pandemic. So from the free training to all of the different online events that I could go to, because I'd missed it. I was working in communities by myself, feeling very, very alone as a freelancer, and then everybody was coming together and inviting me to be part of training online and like learning new skills. And I was so passionate about diversifying my skill set and diversifying my income, because I could see if the pandemic could happen and everything could be pulled, it only exasperated what I already knew. I already knew this, if I'm applying for funding and then maybe I'm hedging my bets and I've got a couple of funding bids in, if they both come back as a no, what am I going to do?
Yeah,
So this space of going, okay, if I can be innovative here and I can model some of that innovation to other people, maybe people will want to do that, maybe they won't, but it's something that I can do and it's something that I can champion. And so one of the next big pieces of work that I did was a podcast similar to this, and the themes were diversifying your income and raising your profile, because I've noticed through my work with Culture Northumberland that we found it really hard to talk about who we were in the world, because partly because of the complexity of having a portfolio career and not being able to say, oh, well, I'm a project manager for this organization, or I'm a CEO over here. We didn't
yeah,
have that same linear journey, but we had an incredible skill set, and basically we were bending and shaping to do whatever job that was on the table, whatever fell into my inbox and someone said, Claire, do you want to do this, whether it was consultancy, engagement work, project management, fundraising, I basically said yes. And that had been, to that point, that had been my career. And then I was like, oh, this isn't really very sustainable, because not all of these people are going to keep coming back to me for the whole of my career. Things are going to shift and change. So once we did that event, I kind of have run with this with Culture Northumberland, and we're still deeply entrenched in this piece of research around diversifying our income streams and how possible that is, and raising our profile in a way that people better understand what it is that we can do for them. So what is it that I offer to, say, Anic Playhouse that I've just wrapped up working with? What is it I can do? Where does my skill set lie? Where, after 20 years, like you say, can I plug in and really help them as an organization? And then how do I then model that to other organizations, and say if I wanted to pitch it out? And I think that stuff is really difficult, and it comes from confidence in yourself, self-confidence, but it also comes from support in the network saying, oh, Claire's actually really good at that, and I happen to know she's free, she's got some time, or Leila could do that for you. And I wonder if, within that Facebook group context, if you're on it more than I am, if you can see that happening more so than it was maybe pre-pandemic. I'm just curious.
I think yes and no. let me explain myself. So yes, I think there's some people who've really kind of got their groove, they've got their niche, they understand what they do, that they're really good at, and they've sort of really focused in on that similarly to you. They've gone, right, okay, I could do all of these things, or I could do this thing and I could just be really amazing at this thing. It's something that really feeds my soul. It drives me. It's my why, it's my purpose, and I'm going to go for that. I think on the other side, the reason that I say no is because it's so precarious at the moment, and it's been so precarious for freelancers through the pandemic that I think there's still that freelancer cycle of if I don't take this work, I don't know where the next work's coming from. So there's still that precarity that is really terrifying for people. So they're just not saying no to anything. And I think particularly at the moment with everything that's going on with cost of living, with organisations stripping back, with fees going down, we're in a really, really challenging time for freelancers at the moment. For organisations as well, it's not just about freelancers, but like the sector as a whole, the money is not enough. And so I think we're in that really dangerous point again where people are saying yes to everything. Some people are saying yes to everything. And that is in itself a massive challenge for the sector as well. So I think, yes, it's great to model it, and it's really great to sort of also help people understand that by doing that, often you get to a better place because you're maybe earning more, you're potentially doing less actually in the scheme of not having to juggle several different things that are at different using different parts of your brain as well. So you're having to switch from one side to another, whether it's running an event to then doing consultancy. That's quite a different skill set that you have to have. And if you have to be taking hats on and off, sometimes on an hourly basis, that's a really exhausting thing to have to do. So I think you're right. I think the modeling of it is really, really important. But I do see that quite a lot of people are possibly in that slightly dangerous hamster wheel place where actually they don't have the time to take a step back, they don't have the time to reflect on it, they don't have the support structures in place to support them to reflect on that as well. Because I know that you do a lot of work on yourself as well. There's that idea of like coaching and really being able to bounce ideas off people. It's really important. And I suppose it goes into that realm of leadership, being able to have the leadership skills within yourself and also be able to work with other leaders around you, to be able to support you and the wider network of your work to do those things as well. We talk about it a lot. So I run a leadership group with part of the Creative and Cultural Zone in Newcastle with Sarah Rod, and that's a huge amount of that is about those sort of the why, your purpose, what drives you, what is really deeply important at your core, and how can you take a step back and breathe and go, okay, what is going on around me that really serves me, and what actually is quite toxic, or not toxic, probably not, that's quite an aggressive word, but how can I sort of channel myself? How can I use these sort of coaching skills and understanding of my practice and my work, and be able to take a look at it from a little bit further away and go, okay, that's why things are feeling quite a lot at the moment. If I do this, this, and this, then that might actually help with some of that. And those are leadership skills. And actually, it's really tough for people if you don't have an organizational structure around you as a freelancer, particularly. So many people are going into freelancing straight away, straight from studying or as soon as they enter the workplace, that if you haven't had that opportunity to have that kind of professional development review type thing, whether that's through a PDR process or whether that's through coaching or leadership or management training or whatever it is, like there's so many people out there who don't necessarily have that opportunity to be able to explore their leadership. And I think in the hierarchical way that we talk about leadership within the sector and the way that it's currently structured, which I know you and I have talked about a lot, it's not really, people don't necessarily even think of themselves as leaders. And yet I would say every single freelancer that I know have had connection with, and that is broad, very, very broad and diverse group of people, every single one of them are leaders. Every single one of them have leadership within their work.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think by the nature of being a freelancer, you're a business owner, whether you like it or not. You've got to do your tax return, you've got to forecast, you've got to plan, you've got to work things out, you've got to, look after yourself when you're poorly, try and take downtime, that whole thing. It's all you designing your own life, isn't it? And that is a leadership
Yeah.
quality it's incredible. We spoke about when we met, I was talking to you about claw leadership, which had been a kind of a shiny beacon for me in my early career. You know, I noticed the people that were doing it and I was really into like, how can I get on that program? How can it fit for me? And then when I fell pregnant, I think my little boy was like a couple of years old. I was like, okay, like let's look at this again. I can do this. Like, let's pick up the application. What do I have to do? Can I make it work? And as I was reading, I think it was like a 2-week residential or something that I applied for and I didn't get it. As I was reading it, I felt like I maybe should have done that a few years ago. So that piece of that leadership that we were all, you know, we were all aware of, and it was like that was a route that you could go down. I suddenly realized in applying that actually that would be very, very difficult for me to make it work because of my caring responsibilities, because I don't have family around to help with the kids. And it was like, oh, is that it now? Like, have I ruined my chance to become a cultural leader? Has that ship sailed? And it was a really interesting set of realizations, thoughts, non-thoughts, you know, because of course, like I've gone on and I'm still doing work that I really enjoy and leading in many ways. But at that time, it felt like that was how you became a leader. That was what you did. Do you know what I mean?
Oh yeah, 100%. I didn't do the fellowship. I applied for the fellowship and got through to the interview stages, which I was very proud of myself. The interview stage was awful though, so I didn't get it. But I did do the short course, and that was really interesting. And I think you're right. I think there's so many people that we see out in the sector who are doing amazing things, who did the Claw Fellowship. But then on the flip side, there's so many people out in the sector doing amazing things who didn't do the fellowship. And it's like, I think you're right. I think we sort of hold it up as this, oh my God, this is amazing. Whereas actually, there's probably 10 times as many people out there doing amazing things who've never, most of them will never even have heard of the fellowship and are still leading in a really generous, really, non-hierarchical, really feminist way of leading, not you're not in that traditional sense of leadership. They're leading with empathy, they're leading with accountability, they're leading with all of these things that are I feel really passionately about with regards to leadership. They're modeling, all of the things that we talk about a lot within leadership. They're doing all of those things, and they didn't learn them in the Claw Fellowship. They have gathered those skills through their lived experience and through other opportunities. And I really think as well, the Claw Fellowship any of the Claw courses are great, and I won't say anything against them, but they are tricky for people who run their own businesses to take part in. They're really tricky for people who have caring responsibilities. They're really tricky for people who maybe don't have the finances to be able to. I know they do bursaries for a lot of them, but even that you still have some amount of pay. But if you're in precarious employment, they're really tricky for people who are in precarious employment because you can't necessarily pay the however much money it is for them. And so they are really, really challenging for people, which I would think is why it's really important as well for us to create, especially in the region, place-based opportunities for people to really explore their leadership, together and individually as well, because I just think that leadership is such an important thing to create the sector that we want to see in the future. If we really want the sector to be empathetic, to actually nurture its workforce as well as its communities, if we want it to be sustainable, if we want it to be all the things that we say we want it to be, then leadership has to be part of that. Because if we lead in the same way that we always have, and if the structure is the same way that it always has been, then we will continue to be in this sort of perpetual cycle of feast and famine, which is what we see across the sector. And it does end up being cycles, where suddenly there's money, then there's not, then there's this, then there's that. And actually, to have that more of that stability really does need that leadership, that really strong, sensitive, empathetic, boundary based leadership.
Yeah, there's so much in the honesty piece on that, isn't there, Leila? Like, if we've always been very, very honest with each other about how we feel. So, how we feel doing the work, how the work is helping us to do what we want to do in the world, but then also how things are landing within our nervous systems. You know, obviously, we've lived through the pandemic together, we've emerged out of that, we've been able to model some great opportunities. And we were in a roundtable discussion that you organised with various members of the Arts Council. I think it was 3 members of staff, wasn't there, from the Arts Council? Which for me felt very, very timely, and also took me a fair few months to get over. So it's that space of being able to speak to the people who are, and I will call them gatekeepers, but in the nicest possible way. Obviously, the gatekeeping funds to be able to allow us to do the work that we see needs and that we want to do in the world, and being able to have that open and honest dialogue with them was super, super helpful. But it was almost like I heard my own voice for the first time, because everybody around the table that came was also really, really honest. And I think we all needed that, didn't we? We needed that
Yeah.
place of honesty. And when I've talked to other colleagues about my part in that, they've said to me, it would have been absolutely impossible for me to be that honest with the Arts Council. And I, in that, have recognised that the word free in freelance, there's a real freedom in being able to say, this is actually how it is when I plug into a community. This is actually how it is when I take a budget to manage with X charity or X organisation. And I was grateful for that.
Yeah, it was, do you know what? I was so grateful for everybody around that table. Everyone was just so amazing. And like you say, the honesty, and I think you say I often am quite honest with Arts Council in all these different spaces, you know, whether it's in one-on-one meetings or whether it's round tables or what have you. And I think it is very much is that free place. I'm not really bound by them. I don't get regular funding from them. I'm not within their structures, but also I think I'm this is a complete privilege. There's quite senior members of the Arts Council in the Northeast that I know really quite well, because of being around the sector for so long, because my mum's been in the sector, because my little sister went to school with somebody's son. All of these things mean that I do actually know people reasonably well. And I think, we talk about reciprocity. There we go. About that kind of sharing of privilege, and I really sort of see that as being well, it's really important to me. I have a huge amount of privilege. I've lived in the Northeast virtually my entire life. I know a lot of people through work and also through socializing and through family, and I saw myself in this position where it was like I can email, I can pick up the phone, I can bump into people, I can do all of these things, but other people don't have that opportunity. And I think it came to me one time, when I think it was at the very beginning of the pandemic, possibly even, and it was like I'd emailed Jane Tarr, tapped my little email out, sent it off. And then somebody else they said something to me, and I said, "Oh, well, I emailed Jane Tarr about that." And they went, "Oh my God, you emailed Jane Tarr?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah, I just emailed Jane." This is somebody who,
Can we just pause on that a second though? Because that amount of confidence and knowledge that it's only an email, obviously they might not reply, it's fine. But in your case, you probably expected a reply and that was also fine. That in itself is wild, isn't it? That we are in these scenarios where we're like, do I dare send this email? Like they're just a person in the world with a job. And that's the hierarchical structure that we're talking about, isn't it?
exactly, 100%. And it's just, and I've told Jane the story as well. I didn't say who it was, but I did tell her the story, and she sort of laughed as well, because it was that whole thing of like actually just a human. And even if I didn't know Jane really well, I quite possibly would have still sent the email. I would have maybe made it a little bit more formal. But I think it's really interesting that like you say, you've got these hierarchies of structure, and people don't feel able to reach out to people within those, or they don't see themselves in a position that to be able to have those honest conversations with people. And actually what that ends up meaning is that we don't have those honest conversations with people, so the people who are able to make change don't really hear what's going on for people, because people feel almost like they need to have this kind of PR shine on them of everything's fine, we're doing okay, everything's all right. Because if we ever at any point say that it's not, then they might go, oh well, you're not good enough. And it's like, well, but I am good enough. It's just the systems are really set out to make it hard for me, whether that's being freelance, whether that's having caring responsibilities, being neurodiverse, being disabled, being black, being, whatever that is, whatever those challenges are for us. Like, actually the system is probably only set out for about 10 to 20% of people. So there's a huge number of us here struggling, and yet we don't talk about the fact that it's really the system as it is, and I mean the societal system as well as the structural system within the sector, doesn't actually work for the majority of us. So it needs to change.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel really lucky that obviously Wendy Scott is a dear colleague. So, I've known Wendy for a long time and obviously been working with her since 2020, and being able to say, this is what we've been able to do with Culture Northumberland. This is how it is all fitting. And yes, there is a geographical boundary around it because we're called Culture Northumberland, but these are people that are making work typically in a rural setting and trying to make it work for them in whatever ways they can. So from sort of drafty, leaky buildings to kind of, paying for travel for people to come up from London or even internationally. And it's been really brilliant to work with Wendy because she has such a wealth of experience. And obviously, she is a local authority as well. And we don't always have that. So, countrywide, that model has disintegrated in a lot of
Yeah.
places, hasn't it? And I don't know whether you feel you have that in any of the local authorities within the Northeast, as well as obviously wonderful Wendy.
Do you know what, the arts teams across the Northeast, there's so many different structures for a start. So I don't think there's anybody who does the job that Wendy does in any of the other local authorities. They're all reasonably approachable in the sense that, I sit around tables with them, I chat to them, I have, whether it's in person or on Zoom or via email. Um, do you know what, Claire? It's just so hard. It's that system. It's so hard at the moment. The local authorities are stretched beyond belief. They have so many priorities that are about helping communities survive at the moment. Austerity, the benefit restructures, taking money out of the benefit system, the lack of support for communities and society as a whole, the challenges within the NHS, particularly around mental health. Like there's just no support for anyone. So local authorities are in a really, really tricky place at the moment. And it means that, of course, the arts are the first thing to go because they're seen as a luxury, even though we know that they're not a luxury. And of course, budgets are scaled back. And of course, like I know talking to Wendy, the levels that she has to work at are so broad. It's never just really sort of high level strategic. It's never just at that sort of mid strategic point, and it's never just at that kind of ground level. It's everything. And I think all of the local authorities are having that on a regular basis, as well as within the local authority fighting for money for the arts, fighting across, whether it's economic development or thinking even broader and trying to think outside of the box to think about how more money can come into arts and cultural activity and come back into the cultural community. I think it's really, really, really tricky for them. And I would say the same for organisations as well. I think it's a really tough time. Trying to run a venue at the moment is really, really difficult. There's some of the big venues that are reporting that they've had a 300% increase in their gas and electric bills. They're also then in this situation, as all of us are, where all of these systems and structures are scaled back for communities and they're working in those communities. So then they're having to become more than just the person who comes and does a nice piece of art or a nice workshop. They're becoming the youth worker, the mental health first aider, the support worker, all of these other things within those communities. So I think it really is it's an ecosystem that we're living in at the moment. And well, at the moment, at any point, it is an ecosystem. We all need to support each other within that. We all need to have empathy. We all need to have generosity within that structure. I see my role very much as making sure that the freelancers aren't the ones always to suffer, because in the same way that arts are always the ones to be cut out of local authority budgets when things get tight, freelancers are quite often the ones that are either put upon more or just pushed out of that picture when it becomes really, really tough for organisations as well.
Yeah, for sure. And I think within that piece, I wanted to touch on this and some of the advocacy that we've done and gentle activism, I think it's been as well, in terms of the money piece. So the advocating for freelancers' time to be honoured and paid and recognised, and the fact that we have to give up something else if we plug into something. So it's something that I've been trying to articulate for quite a long time. I think I probably first noticed about first noticed it about 7 years ago, and then I've been sort of nudging and we've had conversations, and there's been a real shift of understanding as to if you are inviting a freelancer to do a piece of work, um, it's in your interests to do that, and so that needs to be paid for. And so we've seen that shift, haven't we? And we've got an event coming up in Durham. What is the title of that event, Leila? Is it the North
It's
East Cultural
the Northeast
Partnerships
Culture
Annual?
Annual Forum. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And so you're going to be there. So we were talking about that, and I said, right, I'm going to book my ticket. And so at that point of booking my ticket, I had recognized this will be really valuable for me to be in the room. It'll be really valuable for me to connect with colleagues. It'll be really valuable for me to be in Durham. You know, that's nice for me. I live in the, on the coast. It's really nice for me to plug into a city. And there was that sort of slight heart sink moment of how am I going to make that work? Because all of the time that I have childcare and the kids are in school, I'm working in and on my business. I might go for a lunchtime walk a few days a week, but I work really hard when I've got childcare. And then just this week, the email came through. You can apply for a bursary space, and a very generous bursary space. It was £100. So I've seen this before: £25 limited number, £75 limited number. This is the first time I've seen £100. And I wonder if you know much about that decision-making process and how it got to that.
Well, I do a lot of work with NECP, and I, you know, always have conversations with anybody that I work with if they're doing things that I think bursaries are really important. I think one thing to say about bursaries is often they are not, you don't necessarily always have the uptake of the bursaries. So I've put bursaries out before and people have been like, oh, that's amazing. Nobody's applied for them, or like two people have
Same.
applied
So
for them.
that happened the last time I had an event. So the event that I did around culture and climate change, I was cautious about how many freelancers were on the list, but nobody took it up. So we could have tripled, quadrupled, and it was frustrating to me. I was like, oh, we've put the event on anyway. The event's been paid for, the lunch has been paid for, the speakers have been paid for, all the planning's been done, and freelancers missed out. There wasn't one freelancer at that event.
Well, you see, I've had it where there's literally been a room full of freelancers and I've offered bursaries and people haven't necessarily taken them up. But I think the really important thing is that it's a good faith offer. So even if you don't have the uptake that of as long as you've got the funds in place and as long as you've got the good faith there and you've pushed it out to people, I think it's so important. It's so important that freelancers are shown that they are valued within the sector. And I think that's what I say to anybody that I work with. Matthew's taken that on board, which is brilliant. He'd asked me to do a piece for the annual forum anyway. And I think, he really recognises that freelancers do have that challenge. And he came to me and he said, we'd really like to do bursaries this year. And it was like, this is brilliant. And he asked me about how much I thought they should be. And I said, I thought they should be £100. It's the majority of a day. You're taking a day's work out. The majority of us get paid more than £100 a day. So actually, from the point of view of how much money you're losing, it's more than £100. It covers, things like you say, childcare, travel. You can use it on whatever you want. It's a bursary to attend. And so it's just brilliant. It's brilliant to be able to see that. And it happens across a lot of the strategic meetings now as well. So place-based strategic meetings, quite often freelancers are paid to be there if they're attending, to feed into the process, or there's bursaries available or access money. Like, people are thinking about it a lot more. And yeah, like you say, 7, 8 years ago, like, that just didn't happen. You didn't ever get that. But also, I think freelancers are really, really recognizing their value within those spaces. So freelancers are asking more. So if they're invited, for example, invited to do a talk for somebody, oh, could you come in and chat to us about this? It would only be like 20 minutes, an hour, whatever. Chat to some students, chat to our team, chat to whoever. And I really always encourage freelancers to say, oh yeah, no, that would be great. It would be fantastic. What do you want it to look like? Da, da, da. What would the fee be? Because if we don't model that, then actually it's that whole thing, isn't it? That if we don't see value in our time, how can other people value that time? And asking the question is just that. It's a good faith asking the question. If the people have never thought about giving you a fee, it helps them think about it, because they maybe they didn't realize, maybe they're like, oh well, I would do that somewhere else. Well, yeah, because you're getting paid. But equally, the other thing that it does is it models it for the next person. So the next person they ask, they might actually think about it before they ask them and think, oh, actually, we've got £150 in the budget, why don't we ask that person and we can say to them, oh, could you come in and spend an afternoon with us and go through your work and we've got this fee for you. You know, we know that it's probably not what you would charge normally, but here you go, here it
Mm.
is. And I think some of that modeling is really important. I appreciate not everyone feels in a situation to do that. I always ask. I always ask about childcare access and fees for things, even when I don't necessarily need the fee myself. And I always ask because I think it's really important, and I am in a very privileged position to be able to ask that no matter what it is that I do. And if I ask it, then they might think about it for other people, and that's always my thinking in those situations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have had those emails back the same way. So when we were doing some of the early projects for Culture Northumberland and it was around the pandemic, I did ask a couple of artists if they wanted to be on a panel and, share their skill set, and everybody talked together. And it was kind of like a meeting, like colleagues, I guess. And they came back and said, oh, we can't work for free. And I was like, of course you can't. My goodness. Like, and it was almost like I'd asked, like I was being paid because I was being paid for the project, and I was trying to facilitate it so that it would be mutually beneficial to everybody. But they were seeing it with that filter of, well, that's time away from my business, and that's really savvy, and we all model our businesses differently. But I think there's so much to learn in all of that. There's so much to learn about the money piece, and I often feel like even now, even this many years down the line, I'm still trying to get a measure and a sense of what organizations can afford, because there's been a couple of times when I've tried to work out what my fee would be in a really fair way, um, with travel involved and somewhere being really far away and what I'm asked to deliver. And organizations have come back and said, that's too expensive. It wouldn't be fair to pay you that. And I've had to walk away because I've worked it out, and it's like I can't lessen it because you don't think it's fair. Like, this is fair to me. It's
Yeah,
not thousands of pounds. It's what's fair because it's a full day and there's prep and there's travel and all of the energy that takes. And it's been really interesting to me to hear that language from other people, and not to challenge it because that's up to them in many ways, but at the same time I challenge it by saying, okay, like, I'll be sad to miss out, but have a brilliant time. And it's felt hard as well because it's hard to go, oh well, if I just like drop it by 50, like drop it by 100, like what do you do? Like, how do you make that work? And the conversation that we had as part of the Grow program, so November Club's Grow program, with some of the freelancers around the table, was so interesting around that transparency of what people think that they can charge. And oftentimes, because I've been on the other side of things, we've got a much more healthy budget than people sort of going, oh well, so there's this sort of dance, isn't there, where I just try and be really transparent and upfront and say, this is the budget that we've got.
yeah,
How does that work? Have a think about childcare, have a think about travel. But at the same time, people are like exhausted by doing the dance of going, how much shall I write back and say that it costs? Like, will this be okay? Does this feel all right? Yeah, it's so complicated, and I feel it could be easier, but we've lost that table of recommended fees. We used to work off it years ago. Probably not even allowed to say it anymore because I get told off every time I do, but there was a table of fees that made sense, that was about how long you'd been dedicated to the career. So it was about time and experience, and that was kind of modeled in this sliding scale of fees. I know you've done some bits of work on this and we've chatted about it before, but I'm kind of lost off with where it's got to, because I think there was something going to go out and I'm not sure where it got to. Could you update us as to where we
yeah.
are with this tangled web of fees?
Well, I mean, fees are such a tricky one because I'd looked at like having recommended fees through Northeast Culture Freelancers that we could have for the Northeast. You can't, as an organisation or even as a network, you can't actually do that. You have to be really careful around the legalities of it. So I looked into it. Legally, it was like, oh my God, we can't do that. That is too much. However, what we do is recommend the unions. Now, the unions are pretty good. So Artists Union England has got a really good set of fees that are based around experience as well. So, you know, the sort of graduate level, the 3 to 5 year level, and then sort of 5 year plus. So it's a really good one. It's a really good one to look at. ITC have just reissued their fees this week, and they have increased their fees, their recommended fees, to in conversation with equity. So their baseline fees, but also they have a producer rate that they suggest as well. So it's really good for creative producers. Um, and I think that in amongst all of that, so there's a lot of things there. There's a lot of things because our sector is so broad. So equity and ITC rates for actors are really low in comparison to Artists Union England rates for visual artists, pretty much 50% less. So it's actually quite tricky to navigate it, no matter who you are within the sector, like which rate do you go off. I would always point organisations to Artists Union England. I think that they're the fairest rates, they're the most solid rates. I think the new ITC creative producer rate is a really good one. I think it's 200, don't quote me on this, nobody quote me on this. I think it's 275 a day. So I think that feels really strong and solid. But one of the things that I would say is that uh bottom rate on any union's recommended rate list is the bottom rate, and the organisations, and we should all be doing this, organisations should be looking at it, but also we should be calling it out. Those are for organisations that are just starting out. Those are for small unfunded organisations. Therefore, you know, like, they're not for the big funded organisations to be charging out at the bottom rate. Why are we still looking at the bottom rate as being the rate? The bottom rate is the absolute basic that you are legally allowed to pay somebody. So therefore, I really think that people should be looking at that as anything above that. We should always be trying to work above the baseline rates. And I think that often doesn't happen. People look at it and go, oh, I can pay that person £100 a day or £120 a day because that list of fees has said that. And that's not what it's saying. It's saying that's the least amount you're allowed to pay them. You should be looking at more than that. So yeah, I think it is really important. I think the other thing within fees as well is that people don't necessarily recognise the structure of fees. So you talked about like prep time and stuff as well. Like that's really important to take into consideration as a freelancer. You've got quite often got quite a lot of prep time, and it might not be physically preparing, but it might be mentally preparing, it might be thinking about it, and then afterwards it might be reflecting on it and then feeding back to the organization as well. And I think oftentimes people don't take those things into consideration, and contact time, meetings, phone calls, emails with organizations or other colleagues around a particular piece of work. So much of that we don't take into consideration, and that then falls into that big black hole of time I'm not getting paid for. And organizations really need to recognize that, but so do individuals. And one last thing, which I know I've talked about this a bit, but other bits of bad practice, like you say about that transparency. This is a budget we've got, but let's work together on figuring it out. Certain things really frustrates me when people put opportunities out without a money envelope on it, sort of like, oh, give us your proposals. That really frustrates me. And the other thing that frustrates me is when people put contracts out, or give, you know, sometimes it's just giving people pieces of work, because we also know that people work often with freelancers that they really trust, and I'm not saying anything about that, but when they go, oh, here's £5,000 to do this piece of work, and there's lots of materials and maybe paying other people's fees and stuff within that. Like, I really wish organizations would be a bit clearer and go, this is the fee for the artist and this is the fee for the work, because otherwise it's another bit of mental labor that the artist needs to do, of breaking down what they're prepared to pay themselves to make the piece of work for them. Whereas actually it would be much better if they could just say, right, this is the fee and this is the amount you've got for materials, and then the artist can always shift that round a little bit if they need to, but it just takes a little bit of that mental labor out.
Yeah, for sure. And I think good practices around paying people, when I've had Arts Council funding, I've wanted to pay them up front. And there was a fund that I got last year where you had to pay them up front. So you had to pay them 100% before they'd actually done the work. And one of the artists I work with said she'd never ever been paid in that way. She'd never been paid up front. So it was always, she finished the work, she put the invoice in, and then it was 30 days if she was lucky. And so there was I think it happened through the pandemic, we were sharing a bit of a paragraph around being paid on time. and charging late fees if that didn't happen. Because again, in terms of cash flow, if you're working for big organizations and that's happening every time, then your rent and your mortgage and your food bill, like, what are you meant to do? So modeling that actually, if an invoice comes in, the terms, I mean, I used to put on mine, the terms are 7 days, but after 30 days there's a late fee, just to try and hurry them along, because I'd had so many times where 3 months down the line, 4 months after the work, I still hadn't been paid. And so I think some of it's got better. But a lot of the time in big institutions, they see freelancers as businesses. And although we're like micro businesses, right? So we can only keep going if we are paid on time. And if we keep modeling to other people, you deserve to be paid on time. And that means within 30 days and quicker if you can. And actually, if we are the budget holders, which often we are with Arts Council funding, get the money out, get the money
Oh
in
my
the
God.
person's bank
I much
account.
prefer paying people in a one lump sum up front, because then that's that one last thing that I need to think
Yeah,
about. Like, it's done, it's like out of my head.
yeah,
Because the admin of having to go through that as a freelancer, all of that finance side and feeling responsible is, yeah, it's done, it's there, right? Okay, I don't need to worry about that now. Like, the work's gonna get done.
mm, the
I
trust.
always try and lead with trust, always lead with trust.
Yeah,
And it always gets done.
yeah, yeah.
So, but yeah, I agree with you. I think organizations and institutions, like some of the universities, are the amount of paperwork that you have to do even to be able to put an invoice in is quite intense.
Okay.
And IR35 is a real challenge for some of the bigger institutions when it comes to working with freelancers, which is why the paperwork's so intense, because they have to go through either they're bound by procurement, or they're bound by IR35, so they have to go through this whole process to figure out whether you are legally a freelancer or you're legally a PAYE member of staff. And some of the universities will literally, as like a guest lecturer, will try and put you on a payroll to then take tax and national insurance and then give you a P45.
Oh, wowzers.
Yeah.
Admin, so much admin. So we've recorded for about an hour. Obviously, we've covered a lot within that hour, and I'm really conscious of Leila's time in this. But I did just want to finish off with a bit of a provocation from us both. So we obviously have quite a unique position in the work that we do and the work that we're compelled to do. I learned about my human design recently, which was so insightful. If you don't know much about human design, it is a very insightful, if not slightly woo-woo process to understand. But as a projector in human design, it means that I'm here to try and model and try and show the way with things. And it was just also insightful to learn that about myself. And so I'm passionate about doing that work. I'm passionate about, talking to whoever's listening right now to say, what can we do to be more generous? What can we do to try and lead with that phrase of the rising tide lifts all ships? Like, how can we share more? How can we share more process, more practice, more evaluation tools, more funding? If we are lucky enough to get one of our big funds through, who else are we working with? How can we broaden and deepen the work that we're doing and the understanding of who else is in the region doing this work? And not just in the region, if you are working out of region, do you want to take somebody with you? Like, is there somebody else that you'd love to work with, that try working with? I've seen a lot over the years of people picking the same people to work with, and I know sometimes it just gets comfortable and it gets easy, and these colleagues become our lifelong friends. But who else can we work with? Who else can we hold the door open for? And yeah, I kind of just wanted to throw all of that out to you, and I hope to hear back from you, but I don't know whether you want to add anything, Leila.
Absolutely. I think generosity is something that I think about a lot, as you know, Claire. And I think, when we talk about generosity, we talk about it. I think we think money. We think like in these really tangible things. And I think that one of the pieces of work that I like to do around generosity is thinking about it across the 6 pillars. So we've got words, we've got thoughts, we've got influence and attention, as well as time and money, as well as those more sort of clear, tangible things. So it might be in that generosity piece. It might not be that you've got the money or the time to be able to give somebody in that sort of spiral of generosity, but what else have you got? What is there, something else that you can give? Could it be that it's, we talk when we're on social media about sharing something? It might just be that. It might just be that you have time to share something with your network, with the people that you have influence over. It might be that you can give someone some feedback. That is another thing. It might be, you know, that you could have that moment of like really sort of sitting with somebody's works and thinking about it. So it might be that generosity of thought. It doesn't always have to be this real sort of acting of the giving. It doesn't have to be that in any way, shape, or form. Um, and I think the other thing is sort of really recognizing your privilege within situations as well, really recognizing that, being able to go, okay, nobody is ever powerless. I think that we can feel powerless in a lot of situations. And at the moment, particularly when things are really, really tough for people, I think that it can be very easy to sort of think, well, I am powerless in this situation. Nobody's ever powerless. You know, you have power within any situation. It's about your sort of approach to what that looks like, and sort of thinking about your privilege in situations and thinking about whether there's opportunities for you to be able to share that privilege with other people. So spent a lot of time working with artists from the global majority, you know, and lesser represented artists within the sector. And I think I really sort of think that that is deeply important, because actually as a sector we're very marginalizing, and I recognize that I've had privileges in a sector that other people do not have. So like, how can I open the door for people, like you say, hold that door open? How can I make sure that other people have a voice within that? And I think all of us can do that to a certain extent. Do not, of course, do never affect your own mental health in that. You have a responsibility to yourself first and foremost, but equally, where is it that you can share some of that privilege? So how can you be generous in all of the ways that you can be generous, and also how can you sort of really understand your privilege and power and be generous with that as well?
Yeah, that's an incredible space to to leave, to land. I felt really emotional as you were talking there. I feel like Leila needs to do a TED talk. Who's going to support Leila in the TED talk process, which I know is a very administrative heavy process, but I can see it happening. I feel like it's coming. Get ready. Leila, it's been brilliant as always. I love spending time with you as a
Oh,
colleague.
me too, me
Love
too.
watching everything that you model on the Facebook group. It's not just a Facebook group, it's a whole community, and there's a whole set of invites coming through day in, day out to share in this beautiful sector that we work in, to keep ourselves afloat, to extend our arms out to everybody else and say, it'll be okay, we'll find a way, we'll make it work, because we believe that we can. And I think that's how we ended our last meeting. You know, we talked around a lot of different things and we questioned ourselves a lot and we pulled things apart, but then we said, but we're still going to do it. We'll still do it. We'll still make it work. It'll be all
I won't
right.
do anything else.
Yeah, that is part of it, isn't it? That's the honesty. The amount of times I've daydreamed about just working in a coffee shop, and then I go to one and I think it's too busy and noisy in here. I would never like it. Anyway, thanks again, Leila. It's been brilliant. I'll talk to you again really soon.
Thank you.